Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is Raza for Dunya Digital. We have today with us Dr.Ali Khan, who's the Dean for the Humanities and Social Sciences School at LUMS and has also authored 2 books on cricket, The Cricket Cauldron and Cricket, Nation, Identity and Politics. Thank you to Radio LUMS for providing us with the premises to record this session, and thank you so much Dr. Ali Khan for taking out the time for us today. So, writing 2 books on cricket for someone who does not, does not actively play cricket and has not played professional cricket, and please correct me if I'm wrong there. I feel like I am wrong there, but what was the motivation? Why would you want to write 2 books in a span of, I would say, 8-9 years on cricket? What motivated you?
Well, I think that, like many people in Pakistan, there's a deep love and affection of the game.
Yeah.
Sometimes that becomes a love-hate relationship, but for so many of us, we love the game, and I was brought up on it by my father particularly. From a very early age, we were 3 brothers and we would all play the game. And I also spent a lot of time actually not only playing, but actively going to grounds and watching cricket. So, the love and passion is there. And I think you reach a point in your academic career when you are able to then branch out into areas that you really, really want to and have a passion for. And cricket was there. And, I felt it was so reflective of our society. So it was the ideal thing to sort of go and do research on, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. The whole research part of it was wonderful for me. But it's the love of the game, really.
Yeah. And you've brought in your vocation into it because you've tried to give it an anthropological lens to how cricket, the relationship of cricket with our society, and perhaps vice versa, how society is also then kind of influenced by it, and not just the sport itself being influenced by society. My question would be, while you were writing, and you've admitted in your interviews that I've seen of yours, that you've tried to document, it's not essentially it's also a project of history, as alongside being a project of giving it a sociological, anthropological lens. Did you feel that you were the only person doing it? Or because, or rather, Usman Samiuddin has written, then there are a couple of foreign writers who've written, and then there's some autobiographies or biographies that have been co-authored by cricketers of late, especially. What did you feel you were doing slightly different, if or you thought that you were just, initiating something in cricket documentation?
Yeah, I think that there are some very good works on Pakistani cricket. Most of them are more historical. Usman Samiuddin, certainly one. Peter Oborn, another. Wounded Tiger. And I'd read those books from cover to cover, and they really are very extensive. My viewpoint was slightly different. My premise was to come at it and look at it as a way of understanding our society, which is different, to understand, why do we play the way that we do? Is it reflective of our society? How does corruption enter the game? Because it's such a huge premise in our own everyday lives. So my premise was to really look at it sociologically, which I found has been done in other parts of the world. People have written on this increasingly in India. A number of authors have done that. But no one has really looked at it in Pakistan yet. And so I couldn't do a better job than what Usman has done, or what Peter Oborn has done. But I could look at it at a slightly different premise. That was my whole point of view, is to look at it sociologically, anthropologically, and to link it to our society and how it's embedded in our society.
Because you mentioned your father in the beginning, and a little bit context for people who don't know, and if you allow, that you have family in cricket on both sides of the border. So maybe one part is extended, but it's still something that you had access to, right? Which gives you a very unique vantage point in certain ways, that you were looking at cricket like here through perhaps, an administrative, had access, but then you were also related to a cricketer in India. And perhaps you could have access to those conversations or to those dressing rooms, perhaps not, but the access to players and how they were thinking, in perhaps not as antagonistic in 60s and 70s then it became during perhaps after the Ziaul Haq regime, and then we see now in the last 10 years, especially today. And I'll come to that later, that, there have been 2 World Cups in India in the last 12 years, and the difference, how, it feels. But I'll come back to later. So, like, in terms of your vantage point, was how big of a role that did play in terms of, okay, this is something, not only do I want to write it, okay, perhaps, I should.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good question. I think that a lot of research needs to be, needs to take advantage of the situation you find yourself in. And you're quite right. I also found myself in a situation where I had the privilege of being able to access things which normally would be difficult to access. So at the time, my father was the chairman of the cricket board. This is early 2000s, and then again for a second stint. And a lot of the access that I had to cricketers or to understanding, early 2000s, India was coming to Pakistan for the first time in many, many years. Access to what went on behind the scenes, what were the sensitivities, how were we going to welcome India, how were we going to deal with possible political fallout. So I had that privileged access, which really, I think, helped me a huge amount. I have been across the border to India as well, and I had many conversations with my uncle, who unfortunately passed away some time ago. But Tiger Mia, as we always knew him, was always a font of great information and insight to cricket. And you got a different viewpoint again, because of course he played much earlier, but you learnt about the greats of that time. And their mindsets and how much has changed over the years. So yes, I think my research was done at the right time, and that benefited me hugely to be able to have this access, which otherwise is difficult for people to get. And a lot of my book really does benefit from that.
In terms of the contrasting time periods, and this is something again you talk about in your book, and like you said, if you look at the makeup of the team in early Pakistan, 50s, 60s, we have people like Abdul Hafiz Kardar, and then if we come in the 60s, 70s, we have people like Zahir Abbas here, and very people who one can also, be proud to see, in the newspaper or, giving an interview, and then, they didn't only come in leadership roles in the cricket board, but, also held positions in government. So it was kind of an aristocracy playing, something very similar to what you see in England, because in England, football is a mass sport, and cricket is more of, like a middle class, an educated class sport. And that was a similar case in Pakistan. I'm not qualified enough to comment on what was happening in India at that point. Perhaps you can shed light on that, on the contrast of cricket in that sense. And then we see the team of perhaps today. Even today is a very good example, because perhaps there are people like Babar Azam, and there are people like Shadab Khan, Shaheen Afridi. And a lot of these people have, Haris Rauf, stories that are worthy of movies and books on their own, that how success stories. And this shift from Kardar, Zahir Abbas and Imran Khan, so many, it was not even about Lahore, it was at some point about Aitchison, being represented in a team of 11. So how have you, what would you attribute this to? especially given that being successful at a sport is not a criteria, given that squash and hockey, if we were like bigger in squash and hockey than we were in cricket in the 70s and 80s especially. So like, what do you think contributed to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a huge demographic change that did occur in Pakistani cricket, and actually does occur in India as well. It doesn't happen in England. But when you start off playing cricket in Pakistan, it's a very narrow sport. Not that many people play it. Large amounts of the population are not interested in cricket and are not involved in cricket. There's a small group of people who play cricket, most of them actually not even from HSN, but from GC and Islamia College, and dominated by Lahore and Karachi. So that 1979, I think, of all the players that had represented Pakistan, 80% would come from these two cities. And then you begin to see an enormous change that happens. And I think there are a few reasons for that. One reason is the success of the team. So the success of the team from the late 70s, when you're talking about personalities, and personalities in the 70s are large personalities: Mushtaq Mohammad, Imran Khan, Zahir Abbas, just a few of them, Sarfraz Nawaz, Asif Iqbal. You can go on. These are all big personalities, and they become even bigger because they play county cricket and they play World Series cricket.
Yeah.
And World Series cricket really does project you in a way that nothing else did at the time. No Indians played World Series cricket. So in fact, when Pakistan goes to India, I think in the late 70s, the superstars are from Pakistan, not from India. And they are treated as superstars in India. And that today is difficult for us to fathom because of the enormous success of IPL. But at that time, the success of the team is beginning to attract more and more people to the game. You win against India. You win a test in Sydney, a very famous test in Sydney. And that really coincides with the time that PTV is beginning to beam it into your living rooms and into marketplaces where a few people would have a few TVs. But you begin to see it spread. I think at the same time, the Pakistan Cricket Board has a role to play because they start making more and more grounds in different parts of the country. And come 1987, you have grounds where you never had them before. So, apart from Lahore, Karachi, you've got grounds where internationally matches are happening: Sargoda, Sialkot, Sheikhupura, Multan. So all of these come into Peshawar. They all come into the sort of international circuit. I remember reading about Mushtaq Ahmed talking about seeing Viv Richards play in Sahiwal. So for the great West Indian team of the 1970s to travel to these small areas and to be seen is an incredible thing. And it means, he says, I wanted to bat like Richards. So, you begin to attract people in a way you never did before. So, there are multiple things that are happening that are making this sport grow. And maybe the most significant one that happens a little later is opening up of KP. Before, you didn't have any players coming from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, what was then NWFP. And they actually actively resisted playing it because it was seen as the game of the oppressor, the colonial oppressor. But you had people of Pashtun heritage. Imran Khan was one, Majid Khan. Then you had people like Yunus Khan coming in. You had Afridi. And this began to open up Khyber in a way that it had never happened before. And now, half your team is from that area. And it's a very, very strong, pool for us to draw upon. So, these things happened. It democratized cricket. Now, Karachi and Lahore are not so important anymore. It's from the smaller areas. Even people like Waqar Yunus were not from, they were from smaller areas around Punjab. So Punjab opened up, KP opened up. Now you've got Hyderabad, you've got parts that we never used to get people from, Larkana, and so cricket has grown hugely, and I think it did also in India, where Dhoni was from a small town, and the success of these cricketers bred more success and grew the game. In England, it didn't, and I think in England, in some ways, there was a documentary made by Freddie Flintoff, the all-rounder, and he talked about how he goes to young people in England and says, do you follow cricket? And they say, no, we don't play cricket at all. And I think it suffered there also because they took it away from BBC. And it went into cable. And not everyone can afford cable. So the game becomes and remains small. And it remains the preserve of their sort of network of schools. So it doesn't happen in England. It's not happened in South Africa also, where again that school system is where it's coming from. And it led to this change in the type of people playing the game, from more educated, school-based, narrow in Pakistan, Imran and Mushtaq and Zahir and all these legends, to people of lesser income groups. Inzamam was the son of a prayer leader. Muhammad Yusuf, from a different income group altogether, getting involved in the game. And I thought it was fantastic that the game is democratized to such an extent.
You speak of school cricket, and it's fascinating to hear these words right now, because growing up in Pakistan, everyone becomes a certain critic of Pakistan after one bad England or Australia tour, or if we lose a match to a team that is lower ranked like Bangladesh, and everyone's certainly like, the board is not functioning well, and the structures are not right, etc., etc. And one critique that we've heard a lot about, the demise of the good old times, because if you just move back into 2016, 2015, when the Pakistani team was not doing well for a very long time, it was all around that, perhaps, our best years are behind us, and we're not perhaps, going to be as good a team as we once were. And the reason that was put forward, it was that, look at your colleges, look at your schools, and they don't have cricket teams. Departmental cricket is being, squeezed out. And PSL obviously was something that was just, there was like a tussle. And we'll talk about how politics and cricket then became intertangled in the worst way as well. But specifically talking about university and school cricket, in Pakistan, it has been presented as a solution for all ills. That, you institutionalize cricket. You have a cricket team from Lams, you have a cricket team from, Punjab University, Karachi University playing, and that will suddenly somehow, just having these institutions in place, these pathways put in, and a country that was constantly just when we talk about politics, America and the UK are given as these benchmarks. Australia, you look at Australia, you look at the county system, in the UK. That is how cricket should be, and that is how you get a good team. So, what you're trying to perhaps say is that, if anything, that is not what would improve cricket in Pakistan. So, just if you could.
Yeah, no, I don't think that will improve cricket. I don't think it'll harm it at all.
Yeah.
But, cricket itself has changed.
Yeah.
There was a time you could go to university and still play cricket. Majid Khan did it, Imran Khan did it, and many others did it also. But, those were different times. It's very rare now for you to find a cricketer across the international spectrum who has come from a university background. There, you count them on your hand if there were any.
Alistair Cook perhaps comes to my mind.
Maybe Nasser Hussain. There are a few. Michael Atherton. These are university cricketers, but there are very, very few. Andrew Strauss was another one, I think. But there are very few of them now. It's really. They've all been to good schools, and that school system is important for their personal growth, and their game. They have a lot of resources available to them, but it's not what makes a cricketer anymore.
Yeah.
If you're an Oxford Blue or whatever, it's not that you'll get into the England team.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's the way forward. I do think that you do need structures. And probably the biggest problem we have had is that, like so many institutions in Pakistan, they've withered away. They've collapsed. So your domestic structure changes every year. Sometimes there are 6 teams, sometimes there are 20 teams, sometimes there are 15 teams. But we've had no stability at all. A new chairman comes, you change it. Someone else comes, you change it. And this is the tragedy of Pakistan overall. We don't have stability. And where you don't have stability, no one knows what their role is going to be.
Yeah.
And that is much more of a problem than, whether you're coming through a school system or not. And this is what I mean in terms of how cricket reflects what's happening in society. So Pakistan itself as a country has been ravaged by corruption and instability, and we've never followed one route, really.
Yeah.
And as a result, we've reached a point where the country is running on empty now.
Yeah.
How long are you going to continue trying to run on that without any means? I worry about cricket because, the wonderful natural talent and passion of young people to play the game will always throw up good cricketers. But what we find is that they won't thrive. I mean, even your current batch of cricketers could probably be much better than what they are.
Yeah.
Because we're not giving them the support. We're not giving them the steadiness that they need. So I worry about cricket because you've seen it in hockey. And you've seen it in squash. And cricket has survived.
Despite,
right?
Yeah.
So we will still have this problem if we're not careful. And that's why I worry about Pakistan cricket as well.
So I have like a little thesis of my own going on, like in my head that, perhaps this is what this is a solution to Pakistan's problem. So like we saw like Nadra being established in the early 2000s as a system to document, register citizens. Instead of using the existing system, there was a new structure added. Then to improve the health emergency services, we saw like a 11122 kind of a thing. And it kind of then, is being replicated now. We had all these like, transport companies all around, but then, we saw this rise of the rapid transit coming in, and now everyone saw, now Lahore is doing it, so, we need that in Multan, we need that in Pindi, now we need that in Peshawar, now Karachi is trying to do something like that, replicating a newer model.
Yes.
And then we saw in cricket that, we have all these departments, which have been going on for years. We have these, provincial sort of teams, regional teams, but PSL comes in, and suddenly, like in the last 6-7 years, this has been that pipeline of talent coming in to our national team. So, like, since I want your take on it, that because you've seen both sides of, institutions working, how they work inside, and, how that reflects in their performance, that is solution to a lot of structural issues like these in Pakistan, that coming up with new structures that can aid old fading away structures, or is because what seems, at least from the outside, is that improving these or trying to reform these existing big huge institutions and organizations that feed into our system kind of feels like a task that, like a very uphill task, or it kind of feels like, the interests are so, just like so strong that, there's a lot of resistance, and perhaps, just hijacking it from the outside seems like the only viable thing.
I think that's what's happened in a number of areas, as you sort of pointed out. But I think that you can't entirely sort of bypass what is there. I think that will be very expensive for us to do. There are some things that you are doing well, but if you just forsake them and say, forget it now, and we're just going to work on a different route, I think you're losing resources there and some expertise as well. It's a bit like, these days we're hearing that public schools are being sold off. Right? I mean, the state should not abrogate its responsibility. It has a responsibility. Pakistan Cricket Board should not, completely forget its responsibility. We have to reform these things. You have to reform the country. You can't continue the same way. And you can't create something entirely new also. It's just, we don't have the resources to do that. Look at PSL, for example. I think it has an enormous role to play. There's money that comes into it. I think that so recently I read about how one of the franchises has got a fast bowling coach who's a woman. And I think those are fantastic initiatives. And they're bringing new things to the game. They're bringing, otherwise, where do our young cricketers have access to new and global trends coming in? So I think, these are very good, but they are not enough. They might help your T20 game, but we do play ODIs also. We do play Test cricket also. And those are areas where you develop, basic skills. So, T20 cricketer is not going to be able to play Test cricket without those skills. So I think that there are roles to play for these new sort of institutions that are coming up, but we need to reform what is there also. And you can do it. You can improve things, but you need leadership, you need mentorship, you need stability, just like the country does. And, it's the same thing. Unless we do that, I don't, we will continue to do well because of natural talent, natural resources, but we'll never reach the potential that we should.
Speaking of governance and reform, now, especially in the last 1 month, keeping aside the turmoil that was going on in the PCB itself after the governments were got changed and all of that, Pakistan was supposed to host the Asia Cup.
Yes.
And then this fellow Jay Shah, who heads the ACC, they said, okay, no, we can't come to Pakistan, so you have to now move the venue out. A compromise was reached, but we all saw how, Pakistan team being the host had to travel 6 cities, all of that was happening. And then, while the ACC, which is essentially an India-Pakistan thing, and even more so India than Pakistan, the BCCI also seems to have a disproportionate amount of influence on the International Cricket Council, and the whole big three versus the rest conversation going on with now even former administrators from England and Australia saying, okay, perhaps we should only keep the ODI format to the World Cup only, and not play it again. And so, how much of a crisis do you see in the global reform, the governing body of cricket? And there's this money thing coming on, that with IPL and all of that, just changing, you can earn as much money in 4 weeks as you would perhaps in 10 years. And then how do you balance that with, but the rivalry and tension in a Australia-England game or an India-Pakistan game cannot be substituted for a Lahore-Karachi or a Lahore-Delhi match. So, how do you see, in terms of, in the next 5-10 years, there with plans, of hosting a World Cup in the US as well? And I personally, I feel it's mainly aimed at the Pakistani and Indian diaspora as opposed to the Americans. And there are articles on, an article's being written in the US on how they are trying to, municipal authorities in New York are being, manipulated to giving them public parks to create like temporary stadiums. So like, is this like the money rush thing happening to ICC? What happened to FIFA perhaps, like where with the sponsorship of Coca-Cola coming up and, around 2-3 decades ago? Or is this something you think that, cricket is perhaps no one has time to watch 100 overs in a day, or perhaps it's something to do with, the modern TikTok generation not being able to...
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a crisis. I think there's a big crisis, and I think Pakistan will need to be very well led to come out of this crisis. And I'll tell you why I think that. First point is that I don't think there's any game that has such a lopsided financial situation, where 80% of the finances come from one country. So, sorting that out is very problematic. And I think that the second issue is this issue of franchises. And you've already seen that there are players who will not play for their national team anymore, have retired, and would rather play for the franchises. And, there's no, it's not their fault. You've got a career, you want to make the most of what you can. It's not a very long career, it's a sporting career, you can get an injury anytime. And when you're being offered so much more security, then, it's normal to move in that direction. But this has happened across all the cricket playing nations, that you found people that are no longer willing to represent their country on a regular basis, at least. The franchises are beginning to completely change the way that cricket is going to be played. And I say it's difficult for Pakistan because those franchises are controlled by largely Indian money. Now, whether that will mean that Pakistani players will be locked out of even these leagues is something that has to be considered. We don't play IPL. And that's a source of discomfort for some of our players because, again, financially it does mean huge rewards. But will they be able to play a UAE league where most of the franchises are owned by, the ones that are owning IPL leagues? And that is a real concern because otherwise we will just be confined to a few of these leagues. And I have no doubt that these leagues are going to grow. ODIs may wither away. I think Test cricket will be played occasionally, maybe not that often. Bilateral T20s are safe, I think. But Test cricket itself is expensive. And most broadcasters now want India, Australia, or India, England. India is not going to play Pakistan, so that marquee event is no longer there. I think that India has also moved to downgrade our rivalry, so that they playing Australia much more now than they would playing Pakistan. So there'll be a move towards in the media and elsewhere that, look, this is not what it used to be, and we need to concentrate on the top 3 teams. So I think that's is a problem. And there is so much money floating around in India that they no longer need to play an India-Pakistan series.
Absolutely.
Right? So there was a time when they needed to. And that window is gone. There was a time when the Asian Cricket Council was very supportive of Pakistan. And if New Zealand did not come to Pakistan, the Indians would tell them, we're not going to go to New Zealand. So there was that level of cooperation.
When did this happen?
This happened when... after a bomb blast in Pakistan, New Zealand said we're not going to come. So, obviously before 2009, this was much before that.
Is this the Karachi bombing?
I think it must have been Karachi. So, the rescheduled tour was not going to happen until India said that, well, we won't go to New Zealand then. And then they said, okay, we'll come. So, this was when I think Dalmia Saab was in charge of BCCI. And we had very supportive relations. And so whenever there was problems in Pakistan, your Asian nations would support it. So if Australia say, I'm not coming, Sri Lanka would come in their place, or
Yeah.
Bangladesh would come, or India would come, or whatever. So we had the support. Then we lost that support in 2011 because of a variety of reasons, but we lost that support. And now...
Was that variety of reasons other things other than terrorism?
So the 2009 attack is always going to be a problem. And then,
absolutely.
if you blame your neighbors,
Yeah.
it's not going to be taken well.
Yeah.
And then the World Cup that happens in 2011, again, you sort of hint that maybe you should hold this World Cup somewhere else rather than in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and India, because they also have terrorist attacks.
Yeah.
They will turn against you.
Yeah.
And there was a huge amount of upset from the three other South Asian nations, and they withdrew support.
Yeah.
So that was a real turning point for
because
us.
I remember Ijaz Bhatt was perhaps the chairman at that
Yes,
point,
that's
and
right.
he suggested that the World Cups be switched.
Yes.
So that 2011 should be hosted by Australia and New Zealand, and Pakistan, India, the subcontinent should host it in 15. And obviously there was a lot of...
So there was that, and there were indications that, Sri Lanka has also been through similar things.
Yeah.
Then really you do lose a lot of support, which was so important for us, and rebuilding that has been difficult.
On this point, on the 2011 World Cup, it was, you rightly pointed out, it was in the aftermath of the 2009 attack, but also the 2008 Bombay attack. So there was also that political shift in India-Pakistan relationship also happened somewhere around that point. But the match is in Mohali in semi-final, and I don't know if you watched this movie Main Hoon Na, the Shah Rukh Khan movie.
No.
So it feels like a scene out of the director that who would have wanted that in that movie. It's about Pakistan-India friendship in 2004. That the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the Prime Minister of India come out on the field, shake hands, in a grand gesture of solidarity, sportsmanship. There are people from Lahore who've crossed, not people just the officials, but also people just from the city.
Yes.
So just crossing the border, going to Mohali to watch the match. And it actually feels like that the World Cup is happening 200, 150 kilometers from Lahore, because there's that excitement, fanfare you see palpable in the city. And the World Cup happens, Pakistan loses, whatever, we come back, but there's been you could say that perhaps the government used it as an opportunity for some diplomatic grandstanding, but at least there is this feeling that the World Cup is happening in our neighborhood. And there are people, at least we know, my friend, my neighbor, whatever, who's gone to see the match.
Yes.
This World Cup, the Ahmedabad match, it's again in India. It's a group stage match, well anticipated, but there is there's literally no presence of Pakistani fans, and you feel that it's the match taking place somewhere farther, down from Australia, where you just can't go. So it kind of feels also geographically spaced out. And for a Pakistani fan, it's not a new feeling, because we've had cricket away for around 8-9 years. But in terms of the global ambition of the sport, how do you think events like these, where the fans who are not allowed to go in, and this shift of 2011 to 2023, is this a shift of that cricket is going inward and towards franchising, or does it more project on how the Indian government has just shifted from being a moderate Congress government to a hardlining BJP government? And as you said, because of the 80% financial contribution, is this just that, cricket will now go wherever India goes? Is this or is this an oversimplification of cricket right now?
No, I think that you're right. This World Cup has been a strange one.
Yeah.
And Ahmedabad was a painful event, actually. And I'm not talking in terms of Pakistan losing the game. It was painful because I've always been someone who has advocated that Pakistan, India need to play bilaterally, and that our players have been wonderful ambassadors on both sides of good sportsmanship and good spirit. And people on both sides of the border have wanted to see cricket being played, more or less. I mean, there are always naysayers, but it has in the past also been an avenue for better relations and for breaking down stereotypes that we have. It's always something that has brought people together. If you think about it, when India sponsored our entry into world cricket.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
This is, twice we tried initially, and England vetoed and said, you don't have a strong enough domestic structure.
Okay.
And then it was India that sponsored our entry into...
This is year?
1952.
Okay.
And the first team that we play is India. So our first tour, our first test match is against India, and it happens only 5 years after the horrors of partition. Yeah. And yet, when you get to India, there's a lot of love and affection for the players. And it always surprises me that after that very difficult geographical fission that occurs between the countries and the formation of Pakistan, that we should be so warmly welcomed. Lala Amarnath, who's the captain at the time, received the Pakistan team when they came to Delhi at the train station. And there was always, up until, well, like I said, the players have always been on good terms, but they always got on. There was a kind of amity between Pakistan and India, which you still see, which doesn't exist between some, it doesn't exist between India, Pakistan and Afghanistan, for example, or for that matter between Pakistan and Bangladesh to the same level. Indian and Pakistani players have always got on well because we have a common cultural heritage, and that has always helped us. Whenever there's been a break, whenever you go back, there's been this cultural heritage to fall back on. If you think of 99, when Pakistan won in Chennai, it is a memorable time that the Chennai crowd stands and applauds you when you beat India in India. Right? So there's always been this, but Ahmedabad was different. Yeah.
And just to add to this, I'm sure you would remember the Eden Gardens match in 2006-07. They were celebrating, I think, it was like a platinum celebration.
Yes, I remember. Yes.
Salman Butt scores 100 on that match. It was just the celebration of the two countries.
Yes.
And it really felt like, okay, this is not some commercial staged performance, they had planned one in the Ahmedabad match. It actually was something that okay, it's being done because aap mehman hain, and it's kind of a shared heritage of sorts, and that feeling of okay, we are playing our neighbors, or we are playing a team that is very similar to us, or a team that we go way back with, to a contest that it feels more like a Super Bowl final now, where okay, this is like a corporate branding opportunity for everyone who wants to come in, and this shift that has happened is also and correct me if I'm wrong, the liberalization of India happens in the 90s, and Pakistan again is perhaps not as good as other countries are, because Pakistan also privatizes in the 90s, but not at nowhere near close to what the pace at which India goes on and on. And now you say that Pakistan needs very careful leadership to bring it out of this crisis, and we also the lopsided nature of the revenue system. Do you think with the growth of the franchise system, the rise of India as a financial power, not just in cricket but otherwise, and then the rise of the BJP party as kind of a majoritarian party, because like Rahul Gandhi was criticizing Jay Shah a few days ago because the BJP party was like taking them on dynastic politics, and then Rahul Gandhi comes back and says Jay Shah is like the definition of what's wrong with dynasties. So do you see hope in perhaps India, like is our strategy hope that India comes back to democracy, or is there anything else that we can do about it?
So there's I'll come back to Ahmedabad. I think that I was saying that it was painful because it was staged.
Mm-hmm.
Why we agreed to play in Ahmedabad is also a question for us to think about. I think the board should have not agreed to that.
Okay.
I think if you had played anywhere else in India, the reception would have been much better.
Okay.
We saw Hyderabad was when you're going to be playing India, don't expect that Indians will cheer for Pakistan. But I mean, there's a sporting spirit where you don't boo the captain of the opposition. You have to show respect to your opposition, where you don't heckle your opposition as they are out. But it was staged because to have, I think the figure was about 110,000 people, and maybe 3 Pakistan fans, 3 or 4 is what I heard.
Yeah.
Now that kind of lopsided situation where you are practically thrown into the Colosseum to be fed to the dogs, it was staged that Pakistan should be humiliated in the way that it was. And unfortunately, we didn't play well, and that didn't help as well. But I mean, it was what the BJP government wanted. This is a city that is virulently anti-Pakistan. It is virulently anti-Muslim, and as a result, the crowd is always going to be extremely hostile. Now, I've seen a lot of sport. In cricket, I've never seen a crowd like this. But in no other sport have I seen such a lopsided. And this was actually brought up in a BBC article, that there's never been such a situation that Pakistan found itself in. So, it just felt that this was not a sporting encounter anymore. And the teams, like I said, have been absolutely wonderful ambassadors and continue to be. But this was a very unsavory match as far as I can see. It was not about the cricket anymore. And, this is, like I said, this is not what sport is about. And if all our bilateral encounters are going to be like this, then you really do question whether we should be playing. I felt that immediately after Ahmedabad. I think that I've revised that a little bit, and I feel that if you were to play in the southern parts of India, that the reception would be much, much better.
Yeah.
But this was not good for the game. You've also blocked Pakistani supporters from traveling.
Yeah.
There's no way that we can go.
Yeah.
You blocked the press from traveling.
Okay.
I have to say, I don't think it's been particularly well organized, because even other country supporters are not there in large numbers, and that's why I said it's a strange World Cup, because you don't have the same crowds. I mean, when you play Australia, it's a hostile crowd, but it's not a crowd that will boo and it's not non-sporting, and so this was a strange, not a nice game. One normally looks forward to India Pakistan, and I was. But the crowd was really, it's not a memorable occasion.
There was a strange exhibition of religiosity there as well.
Absolutely.
People are chanting Jai Shri Ram on Muhammad Rizwan.
So, I said, it was staged. There are a lot of BJP supporters that are there.
Yeah.
The crowd is riled up as it is. And this is the problem we have now. You've poisoned people.
Yeah.
So in the past, the people themselves were very happy to have these encounters. We all support our own teams, but we respect our opponents, and that's fine. But when the people are poisoned, the atmosphere is no longer one that is conducive to sport. And that is a big problem. So I'm hoping that atmosphere doesn't extend to other parts of India. I don't think it would in Mohali, for example. I don't think it will in Chennai. I think we'll get support in Chennai. I think we'll get support in Bangalore.
And Kolkata, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually think that the second most popular team in this World Cup will be Pakistan. Because we do have good players and we've got charismatic players and they are very well behaved as well. They've been fantastic ambassadors. So I think that will be the case. But this game was an unfortunate one, and I think that political angle and the BJP that really has poisoned society. We've been through it. We've been through the poisoning of our own society in the past. But I think India is playing it's a dangerous game to play when you radicalize your own population.
And again, I'd like to repeat, is our best strategy hope that India changes, or because given the current structure, there doesn't feel like that there's any other way out of this?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, like I said, when we play India in neutral venues, the atmosphere is fine. It was wonderful in Melbourne where we played last time. It's perfectly good in Birmingham where we played in the past as well. I think in the Gulf also it would be fine. I think the first steps would be for us to play a little bit more. You don't want to play again in Ahmedabad. I don't think that's right. But gradual steps, I think, would need to be taken. There's a lot of political work that needs to be done where we need to repair our relations. I think Pakistan needs to look at themselves as well. We need to put our house in order. You can't discard India because they're such a huge part of this that you can't sort of say, okay, we're not going to play.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think we need to put our own house in order and at least have the moral higher ground in this, so that we can negotiate from a morally superior position, which I think we had with the Asia Cup, and I think people realize that, and people realize what happened in Ahmedabad. Not only Pakistanis, but you've had people write in from other countries. So I think we need to repair our relations, and I think overall, if your relations begin to repair, then it'll have an impact on the cricket as well.
You have extensively written about cricket diplomacy as part, how it's affected or impacted foreign relations, and obviously we've seen, especially with India, how our relations affect the cricket. But so there's one very big, famous incident of Ziaul Haq going and and then the tension diffusing, and you've mentioned about our relationship with the UK, just being a bit especially in the 90s, perhaps we saw a dip and then we go back again. Do you feel that with Pakistan perhaps being better sporting side right now, but with a football's popularity in certain countries, including England and India and all of that, and then Pakistan's reducing financial power or impact on the cricketing stage, on that this aspect of cricket diplomacy will also fizzle out or is fizzling out, because one would have expected that the soft power of sorts of that cricket brings to the field would perhaps help Pakistan. But in my opinion, and of course I would like your take on it, it perhaps does not feel as strong as it was perhaps a decade or two ago.
I think it remains very relevant. I think it remains an avenue for improvement in multiple areas. Now, how you use it is the important question, really. I think with India, the issue is that I really think that the issue is more with the current Indian government. I didn't want to believe this in the past, but I do believe now that there certainly have been efforts by the Indian government to marginalize Pakistan, including in cricket. Right? So there was, I think, 2019 World Cup in England. There was a strong campaign by them to sort of push us as a terrorist state, and we should not be playing with Pakistan. And, this current BJP government, and you've got a lot of BJP people who have been put into important areas of almost everywhere, whether it's universities and certainly BCCI and other institutions. And if they have a mindset where they so distrust us, for whatever reason, we don't need to go into that, whether it's Pakistan's fault or India's fault or whatever, but if they so distrust us and they don't need you anymore, then I think they can continue to. This is why I said I'm worried about Pakistan in franchises even, because they can tell the franchises, don't take Pakistani players. And they'll have to acquiesce to that. In the same way that I think we weren't banned from IPL at one point, we were just not chosen. And that was strange. I think it was 2009, because we had won the T20 World Cups. You'd expect a few of us to be at least good enough. So I think that with India, this is the problem now. With other countries, I think cricket remains one of those areas of commonality for us. And one of the areas that we can still talk about with a certain amount of pride. Pakistan, may be going through difficult times, but the team is still good. And it's a very likable team. It's a team that is popular in countries where we do play, whether it's England or Australia or Sri Lanka, whatever. People like seeing the way that Pakistan play, and you've got some extraordinary good players and charismatic ones, which we didn't 5 years ago now. So I think that it remains an important part of our soft power, probably the only. I mean, we have had made enormous success also in sort of culture and music and arts as well, and film. But cricket dwarfs a lot of that. So I think it remains an important part. It's just with India, our relations have become so poor that they can continue to ignore us. I think it's not good for them also, because we can't change our neighborhood, and you want to move on. But at the moment, it just feels like they're willing to bleed us, and we'll bleed much more quickly than them. They don't suffer the same problems.
I just have two more questions, and there were a couple of questions I posted online. I was interviewing you, so some people just asked a few questions. But so if you could do not as a cricket enthusiast, but as someone who also studies society, people behavior, there's something very interesting that happened 2-3 days ago. Ridiculous, but still interesting, that the official Twitter handle of the Israeli government thanks India, and then in an indirect gesture mentions Mohammad Rizwan's statement about support for Gaza. And then you see that the most propagandist material coming out in support of the Israeli aggression outside Israel is coming from the BJP social media team. So just purely as someone who is interested in human behavior, India has traditionally been a country which, it's been taboo to say that earlier, but I think now we can safely praise Jawaharlal Nehru in today's Pakistan, that Nehru, the big leader of the third world, a very big champion of the Palestinian cause. And now to see that shift in India coming from in the digital space, and then this alignment of sorts, which kind of now feels natural, that perhaps a neo-Nazi Sangh army in India would definitely support the massacre in Gaza. How do you just equate this, or perhaps just see this shift that has happened in our neighbor that we also saw perhaps in the 80s and 90s with the dictatorship in Pakistan. But like, do you see that, like, my question, perhaps it's a naive, how much of it is organic and how much of it is manufactured? Because it's just not a India or Israel specific phenomena, the rise of populism, but it's just being weaponized in a way that
it's very disturbing that this kind of thing would happen, and yet sadly I'm not surprised. I will point out that while that tweet has got a considerable amount of traction, there are protests in India against Israeli aggression as well. So I think one needs to keep that in mind. But, you've mentioned basically what has happened here. We have seen the impact of the radicalization of society. We've been through it in Pakistan. And that's why, I feel that seeing it happen in India is very disturbing, because you can see that this will get worse. And they're following a similar path to what we did. But when you're actually radicalizing your society, it's 10 years later that the worst impacts of that begin to bear fruit. Yeah. And, so you're lurching towards a much more radical extremist society. And, we've seen that happening in Pakistan. We see it happening in India right now as well. And you don't see the same inclusive society that you did know in the past, a much more caring society, one that supported the Palestinian cause more than we did even. So it is very disturbing, but you've kind of opened Pandora's box purposely. And what I mentioned is, like, you've stirred this poison into society. You can't unstir it easily. Yeah. You have made a conscious effort to do that in your society. You've turned people against one another. We continue to do it in our own society today, the way we treat our own minorities and the way we have treated some of those who've been oppressed in Pakistan. So we're certainly not, whiter than white either. Yeah. But you can see that this is happening in India, and it scares me because, we do want to have, we share human values. Yeah. We should share the same values, and seeing this kind of hatred, which of course now travels much more quickly because of social media, is a very scary thought, because we're headed for more radicalization, more such genocides that we're seeing at the moment happening, and God forbid that it also happens in our neighborhood.
So the questions that I was asked to ask you, like, okay, one's very ridiculous. It has nothing to do with what you do or cricket. The question is about hotspot. And people have complaints about hotspot, and they're like, okay. And I was made sure on Twitter that I asked this.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So the question is that, can we have hotspot back in Lums? So I don't know if you are qualified enough to answer. But,
that's, I'm sure Hotspot would consider it. Yeah. But that's for the Lums administration, really. I'm not part of that side of the administration at Lums. But, I'll just say that we were in Rome over summer. Yeah. And the main reason to be in Rome over summer was to sample the ice cream and come back and do something similar. So,
oh, wow. Okay. So should we expect
expect new flavors. Yes, yes.
Okay. Great. Second, do you honestly think, keeping aside the emotion, that Pakistan will win this World Cup?
I really shouldn't say that, because, Kali Zaban and all the rest of it, and, Nazar, and I do think, and I had a similar question asked not long ago. I do think that India are very red-hot favorites, not only because they're playing at home, but because they are at the moment they are by some distance the best team. They don't have weaknesses. They're playing very well. I think that if we make it to the semis, then we become very dangerous.
Yeah.
Because, we can do anything. And that's why teams are scared of playing us. That consistency is not there, sadly. I think we are missing Naseem Shah hugely.
Yeah.
We need consistency to get into the semis.
Yeah.
If you can get on a bit of a run, then anything can happen. But I'm not going to say more than that, I think so.
And the third question was that so a lot of people have this, that 92 maybe hua tha thing going on for them as something that, they kind of try to pacify themselves with. Okay, so that we're still in it and there's still a lot of 92 references coming on. The question was, what is your go-to thing to pacify yourself with? Oh, if Pakistan's playing bad, okay, if this happens, do you have like a superstition of sorts that, okay, if this player scores this much, or if, we have a wicket not down by the 15th over, there's a chance that we can do? Or do you try to be a
No, I don't have
fan?
superstitions really. I try to wear a green shirt when Pakistan is playing. It works sometimes, it doesn't work sometimes. But, my go-to point is basically this. We come back to 92, we come back to the Champions Trophy.
Yeah.
We lost very badly in Ahmedabad, but, we can bounce back. I think that mercurial nature of Pakistan cricket means you're up one day, down the next.
Yeah.
And that is the brilliance of Pakistani cricket. And that is what sport is about, really, right? I mean, that's what makes it so wonderful and so enticing. And that's why I think Pakistan is such a favorite team for many people, because we have this ability to just pull the rabbit out of the hat one day and the next day is just disastrous. But so I'm always hopeful, because I think that we have the capacity, capability and potential to pull off the impossible.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali Khan, for your time and for answering the questions so patiently and listening to my very long questions as well. And we'll be back with another session very soon. Thank you so much.